We have a great program lined up for you over the next 3 days.
People across the country know very little about the American Legislative Exchange Council.
We're truly the only organization that brings together members of the public and private sector to share ideas.
It's just been the last couple of years that some groups have focused on bringing it to life.
Show me what democracy looks like! ALEC is a dubious organization where you have corporations and legislators behind closed doors in there. They won't let us in, coming up with model legislation.
We believe that there is nothing but good things that can come from conversations between business and elected officials.
We're your partners in this endeavor to discuss ideas and potential policies that may impact both our communities and our companies.
We're trying to pass the exact same laws at the exact same time, using the same language, the same talking points, the same arguments.
State legislators come to resorts and hotels where they're wined and dined in the evenings by corporate lobbyists. This type of operation that ALEC has set up gives special interests extraordinary access, virtually unprecedented access, to the state legislative leaders in nearly every state in the country, out of the sight of the local press, out of the sight of their constituents.
How open do you see ALEC to the media and to the public right now?
ALEC is a transparent organization. It's pretty clear what ALEC members do.
If ALEC is completely transparent, how come we're not allowed in the task force meetings where they're talking about this policy and working on these things together?
I'm going to come out of the closet right now as a teacher. As far as we know, we're the only ones who've been inside and actually gotten to watch what they do.
Does ALEC do any lobbying at all?
None.
Zero.
Zero.
The evidence that ALEC's work is political is enormous. It is the very essence of lobbying.
It's quite clear they're absolutely lobbying.
If they keep claiming that this is not lobbying, and if they keep funding these activities with tax-deductible, these so-called charitable contributions, they could get into serious trouble.
Support for this program was provided by viewers like you who are friends of Montana PBS. Thank you.
I'm here on a fact-finding mission. You know, is this something that seriously can benefit the state? You know, is there information here? Is it a worthwhile organization to be involved with?
This is Montana State Senator Roger Webb's first ALEC meeting. Right away, he likes the idea of businesses and lawmakers working together.
Good convention?
Yes.
Awesome.
This is going to be an exciting time for us to learn from each other, engage with each other, and have a splendid few days.
I come from a very heavy manufacturing background. I came from an energy family, you know, so I was intrigued. You know, and how manufacturing and business is involved in the political arena. There's a lot more of a business sense here. You know, how it affects manufacturing, how it's going to affect bottom lines of corporations.
This morning I'm talking at breakfast. I've got North Carolina guys here and Wisconsin and Michigan, and it was really interesting. And we're talking about education, and we're talking about natural resources and what industries that are thriving and are not thriving and why.
For Montana Representative Dan Solomon, this marks his second ALEC conference, and he's still getting to know how it all works.
I'm not in the very high up in the organization in a sense, so you know, I'm just a member that gets to come and listen to some of these things. But between the people in the real world, the businesses, the people that make things happen, and the legislatures who are trying to make the real world work, there's a combination, so you get different viewpoints.
So it's the ambassador level.
ALEC's communications director, Bill Meyerling, says going to these conferences is like getting together with one big ideological family.
A lot of legislators who join ALEC may have been alone in their states. They may not have known that they had partners who shared their perspectives on limited government, free markets, and federalism. They come here because this is a family to them.
It's just heartwarming to know that wherever you might go, you will always run into an ALEC member, no matter where you go in this country.
The American Legislative Exchange Council has been around since 1973, and Representative Solomon and Senator Webb are just 2 of its 2,000 current legislative members, or public sector members. Legislators are only half of the equation at ALEC. There are also more than 200 corporate members, or as ALEC refers to them, private sector members. These private sector members are critical to ALEC's operation.
I am proud of our partnership with the private sector. We hold them in great esteem.
How is ALEC funded?
ALEC is a membership-driven organization. The public sector members pay $50 a year to be members, and private sector members join on a sliding scale.
ALEC describes itself to the public and press as the largest voluntary association of state lawmakers in the country, but in fact ALEC is largely not funded by those lawmakers. So it's a bit
Lisa Graves is the executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy, a progressive watchdog group that focuses on corporate influence in politics.
In fact, ALEC's revenues are primarily from sources other than legislative dues.
Private sector members join on a sliding scale. Do they pay more than the public sector members?
Yes.
Is it significantly more?
Yes, but given the bottom lines of the individual businesses, I would say it's actually less.
According to ALEC's private sector membership application, corporations can join at 3 levels: $7,000 for the Washington Circle, $12,000 for the Madison Circle, and $25,000 for the Jefferson Circle.
It definitely sounds like most of your funding does come from private sector.
I believe it's about 60 to 70% comes from the private sector. The rest comes from the public sector, from meeting attendance, from general support, from foundations.
By our calculation based on ALEC's tax forms, 98% of its revenue comes from sources other than lawmakers, coming from corporations and foundations.
From what I'm gathering, the bulk of their revenue comes from corporate donors. You know, folks who have a vested interest in legislation and, you know, the way the company and the way the country runs.
Does that concern you at all? That's the thing that I think people have been concerned about. Why doesn't that concern you?
I've been there. I mean, as a business owner, yeah, I contributed to a lot of different causes. Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Little League, you know, I mean, it's just a different cause.
Beyond the basic $7,000 to $25,000 membership fees, corporations and foundations also sponsor several meetings each year, including this one.
Well, thank you again to our sponsor, Citizens for Self-Governance. We appreciate your sponsorship of this meal.
ALEC has these placards that are posted outside the rooms that show all the corporations that are funders, and they distribute a pamphlet for the conference.
Sponsored by Peabody Energy. Well, we know who sponsors it.
There you go. Yeah,
All right.
Everybody does one.
Yep.
Anyway, this is where I was headed because the other one's endangered species and this was environmental protection. So.
When you're walking around, it is kind of clear who's a sponsor. Do you feel any pressure as a legislator?
I don't.
And why is that?
I think a lot of the folks that are donating, you know, for this, I mean, that's just their way of expressing an appreciation. To be honest with you, I bet if you walked out there right now and talked to 10 people, 8 people couldn't tell you who sponsored lunch.
I can't speak for the lawmakers and what they recognize and what they don't. I can say that all meetings of all types, at all levels, in all places, have sponsors.
Tonight at 5:30 here in the building is the ALEC's annual holiday party. It's the Jingle Bell Rock. Our good friends at Reynolds America are, again, our hosts for that. Good and long time friends.
Say I'm a corporation or a private sector member and I join and I pay $10,000, whatever the level is. Is there anything I would like to get out of the process if I'm a corporation?
I believe that every company is interested in their bottom line. But with that said, that's the value of discourse, and that's the value of having lots of people with a variety of opinions around the table.
Corporations pay much larger sums to be ALEC members. They sponsor the meetings, the meals, and the workshops. But there's another sponsorship they provide that's perhaps the most important and the most controversial.
Corporations, in order to get the access that they get, are charged between $2,500 and $10,000 a year to sit on task forces with lawmakers.
A task force is something like a legislative committee. This is where the real work is done at ALEC, where model legislation is introduced, amended, and voted up or down. ALEC has 8 task forces dealing with everything from taxes and energy to education and international relations. Corporations pay extra for every task force they join.
Can they choose which task forces they want to be on?
Absolutely. And that's one of the special things about the organization. You work with us at the intersection of your policy priorities. You work on specific issues that are of interest to your bottom line.
The fact that corporations are paying for access to the task forces they want could come as a surprise to some ALEC lawmakers.
Do you know how or private sector members get on task forces?
Nope.
No idea. Do you think lawmakers fully understand what ALEC is doing, how they're funded?
I think some lawmakers do and some lawmakers don't. Perhaps some lawmakers unfortunately don't care.
I think education and learning is always an ongoing process, and I believe that all legislators and all private sector members and all staff always need to learn more about the ALEC process.
Montana PBS wanted to attend the task force meetings to learn more about them, but we were told the task forces are off limits to the public and the press.
So is the public allowed to partake in this or be in the room, do you know?
I don't think so. I guess it's not, I really don't know. I guess I don't see many. Basically, you have to have your badge to be in them, I guess, but I don't know if it's because you got to pay to come to these things or I have no idea.
Again, it's something that some ALEC members are unsure of. The Montana delegation was surprised to discover that the press is not allowed to cover the task force meetings.
It was our interpretation, our impression as a group, that you folks could pretty much go where you wanted. And that's kind of the take we had. But I found out from a couple other folks that you weren't.
So Senator Webb and Representative Solomon described for us what happened in the task forces they attended.
You go there and you've got this probably 50, 60 people in there that are the people that make these decisions and talk about from around the nation, both from a business standpoint and accounting standpoints, from legislative standpoints, on how a certain tax issue would affect everybody. Is it good for anybody, everybody?
Behind these doors, lawmakers and corporate members sit side by side, sharing the chairmanship of each task force. For instance, the Energy, Environment, and Agriculture Task Force is co-chaired by a Wyoming lawmaker and a director from American Electric Power. In the past, corporate members of the Energy, Environment, and Agriculture Task Force have included Peabody, Duke Energy, British Petroleum, ExxonMobil, Shell Oil, Chevron, and Marathon Oil. Everyone on the task force gets to vote on the model policy.
I attended one task force meeting this morning on federalism, and they adopted some policies. And again, it was parliamentary procedure, just as if you were sitting on the Senate floor. Everybody on that particular task force got to voice their opinion, nay or yay.
So were things unanimous? Was there debate?
It was a voice vote. There were no nays. So, being unanimous, who knows? But for the most part, it was a yes.
People have been shocked to hear that there's an organization where our duly elected legislators think that they should be giving corporations an equal voice and vote to themselves.
This is model. These are discussions whose result is a web page. This isn't something where policies are enacted because people came to a meeting. It's simply a discussion that creates a model that is posted on a website.
But critics like Graves say this model legislation is very valuable to understaffed and overworked lawmakers across the country. Furthermore, Graves believes corporations have tremendous influence over the lawmakers they're working with. That's because many of these lawmakers are attending the meetings and the task forces on ALEC's dime.
ALEC does offer scholarships to lawmakers to go to these conferences. And the corporations do subsidize ALEC. They pay to be members. So the majority of the costs are going to be borne by the corporations who are pushing the legislation.
Edwin Bender is the executive director of the National Institute on Money and State Politics. The group runs the website followthemoney.org, a searchable database of campaign spending in all 50 states.
Generally, the lawmakers, they get scholarships. They go attend the conference. I think some probably pay for themselves, some probably are subsidized.
For now, Senator Webb is one of those who is planning to pay for himself.
This trip's on Roger. I mean, that's out of my pocket. I came here to learn.
So did they offer to pay out of the scholarship fund?
I haven't had an offer.
Do you know if you're going to get reimbursed?
Hopefully we'll get reimbursed.
Does that come out of the state scholarship fund, or?
I honestly don't know. They just said we will give you so much to go, and it's hopefully it won't cover it all, but it'll cover most of it, hopefully.
If they are reimbursed, the money could come out of what's known as an ALEC State Reimbursement Fund account. Montana has 2 lawmakers serving as co-chairs at the state level, and they're charged with getting corporate donors to give to that reimbursement fund. But the cash is all sent on to ALEC nationally, and ALEC provides the reimbursement checks.
The travel reimbursement funds are anonymous donations. Those reimbursement funds are managed by the organization. It's essentially a blind trust. So legislators themselves don't know what money is in or where it came from. Now, the point of that is, again, it's a check and balance. It ensures that it's a church and state relationship between the public and the private sector.
But Meyerling says requiring those donations to be anonymous is a new thing. And Graves says in years past, lawmakers were more than aware of which corporations paid their way to an ALEC meeting.
In fact, we have documentation from open records requests of ALEC lawmakers telling other lawmakers, please thank the corporations that paid for your trips to the ALEC conference. You know, those are gifts. And the corporations are getting something out of that. They're getting special access to these lawmakers.
Montana PBS filed a Freedom of Information request with the state's co-chair asking for financial records from the state's ALEC Travel Fund. We received no response. However, a few years ago, the Center for Media and Democracy was able to acquire financial records for ALEC travel funds from numerous states, including Montana. The records reveal that between 2006 and 2008, Northwestern Energy was the biggest donor to the ALEC Scholarship Fund, chipping in $15,000. Other donors included Peabody Energy, Altria, and Pfizer. Donations to the account during that 2-year period totaled $22,000. 34 Montana lawmakers received payments out of the ALEC state account, ranging in amounts from $54 to nearly $2,000.
That's real money to you and me. It's certainly greasing palms, so to speak. I mean, it's helping things along.
The state reimbursement accounts are not the only way a lawmaker can get at least some financial help attending an ALEC conference. If a lawmaker is assigned to a task force, then they're automatically eligible for reimbursement at certain conferences. That's because the corporate-funded task forces set aside some money to help pay for their lawmakers' travel. Recent ALEC Spring Task Force documents make that clear, saying, the Civil Justice Task Force will cover 2 nights in the host hotel directly and reimburse travel expenses up to $350. And ALEC made a special reimbursement offer at this December conference. $2,000 was made available to every state to help pay for newly elected lawmakers to attend.
We have absolutely conclusive evidence showing that ALEC has paid for trips for lawmakers, millions of dollars worth of trips for state legislators to come to resorts and hotels where the legislators often bring their spouses or their kids. They're wined and dined in the evenings by corporate lobbyists, and these gifts are valuable to these lawmakers.
I do believe it's a bit of a misrepresentation. We aren't sending people to suites, we're not staying at Ritz-Carltons, we're not at the Four Seasons, we're not at 5-star, 6-star hotels with butlers. Meetings have meals. People pay to attend meetings, and while they're working for 17 hours a day, someone probably wants to eat. And so there's a breakfast, it has eggs and bacon. To think that that is something that curries favor is a misrepresentation of the facts. That is making someone's stomach happy, not making someone's mind take action.
When lawmakers take these trips and they're reimbursed by ALEC, which is funded by corporations, should they have to report that somewhere?
Of course, I think they should. I think the transparency, the idea that lawmakers are beholding and accountable to the public, transfers through most of their public life.
Bender says the travel scholarships amount to corporate influence, especially when the corporations that pay to sit on a task force are helping to pay for the plane tickets, hotels, and meals for the lawmakers who sit on that task force with them.
It doesn't pass the smell test, certainly. And that's the problem. You end up with an insidious little system in which people are rewarded for doing this, working in the interest of this very small set of companies.
How come we're not allowed in the task force meetings where they're talking about this policy and working on these things together?
Mm-hmm. I believe that transparency is beneficial to society. But at the same time, I also believe that there are opportunities for deliberation where privacy is important. So people can feel free to express their views, work through problems, and identify a way forward.
Even though ALEC says it's not secretive, it's a very secretive organization in the sense that while the press is invited to certain aspects or can peek into certain aspects of their operations, the core part of ALEC where the work gets done, those task force meetings where corporations are voting alongside legislators, they do not want that on record, they don't want that on tape, they don't want that on film, they don't want that on audio.
Issues that affect public schools. I'm going to come out of the closet right now as a teacher. I'm sure that I'm not very well represented in this room. My friend and I were able to walk in and didn't immediately get kicked out. We were kind of like, maybe we should see what they're doing in there. Because nobody's been able to get inside and witness their task force meeting.
In November of 2012, teacher Sabrina Stevens crashed an ALEC Education Task Force meeting and recorded a small portion with a flip cam.
The first thing I noticed was that there were more of the private members, the lobbyists, than there were actual elected officials. I see a majority of private sector members in this body completely outweighing the democratically elected public people who are supposed to be making our laws, the people that we elect. They did their votes separately, which I think they kind of understand. There's something improper about lobbyists voting side by side with actual elected officials, so they at least break it up. I've got a huge problem as somebody who's lived through the kinds of policies you guys are voting on behind closed doors today. I have a huge problem with how this process works.
I have seen the video on YouTube, and that's about all I know about Sabrina Stevens.
ALEC's communications director Bill Meyerling says Stevens didn't pick the right time to express her opinions.
I believe that had she participated in the process as opposed to jumping over and stifling the process, people would have been more willing to listen to her. There are all kinds of disagreements in task force meetings. People don't come and agree. We want more perspectives, more views, but adhere to Robert's Rules of Order.
But Stevens says she heard no differing opinions or contrary voices.
There was never any disagreement except until I stood up. I mean, it was just lockstep. They did their vote. The private sector groups always voted first, and they would give their round of ayes. Nobody objected. Then the public members would vote. They'd give their round of ayes. No objections. Yes, but this organization has no legal authority to make such policies, and that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time. You really get a sense of how the influence process really works. They're sitting next to someone who paid for their airfare, who paid for their scholarship, quote unquote, to go to this meeting, who's paying for their hotel in this nice place. They're basically indebted to these people at every moment that they're next to them. And then they're put in a position where they've got to vote on these laws.
Your constituents can't go on a trip with you for a week 3 times a year, hang out with you, vote with you on the legislation in advance, wine and dine you.
We don't stand a chance against people like this, if we don't have, if there's not a level playing field when it comes to making the law.
There's not public comment, right, at the task forces?
There is not public comment at the task forces from individuals per se, but about 40% of our private sector membership is made up of think tanks that are representing citizen organizations from states.
What ALEC's task forces do is provide a special secret forum for special interests to have the ear of these legislators without any countering view from groups that are opposed to that legislation or citizens who might be opposed to that legislation.
Graves says in the past it was almost impossible to know what took place during these task force meetings. That's because there were no publicly available minutes or agendas, and the model bills that were introduced and approved behind closed doors were only available to ALEC members. So no one knew for sure if a bill introduced in, say, the Montana legislature was actually an ALEC model bill. But in July of 2011, Graves and the Center for Media and Democracy received a trove of ALEC model legislation from a whistleblower.
The bill set was nearly 1,000 pieces of legislation covering almost every area of American life, including environmental issues, working rights, the rights of Americans to sue if their parent is killed or injured by a drug, an FDA-approved drug that's recalled, taxes, schools, privatizing Social Security, privatizing Medicare, Medicaid, privatizing prisons, a whole array of bills that were part of the ALEC legislative agenda that had been secretly voted on by corporate lobbyists and politicians.
The Center for Media and Democracy released all of the documents to the public, launching a website called ALEC Exposed.
What surprised me was that many of these pieces of legislation I'd heard over the last few decades moving in the state houses and even in Congress, but I had no idea that ALEC was behind it. I didn't know how incredibly powerful and influential this group had been.
Sometimes we forget the incredible work ALEC does and the effect it has on state and national policy.
It was one of those big successes that recently focused the media glare on ALEC. It was a bill they picked up and transformed into model policy that took a terrible turn.
Sanford Police Department. This guy looks like he's up to no good or he's on drugs or something. It's raining and he's just walking around looking about.
On a Florida night in 2012, armed neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman decided 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, who was walking home, looked suspicious.
These assholes, they always get away.
And began following him on foot.
Are you following him? Yeah. Okay, we don't need you to do that.
The two eventually got into an altercation, and Trayvon Martin was shot and killed. Zimmerman claimed self-defense, and authorities initially released him, saying his actions were protected under Florida's Stand Your Ground law.
I think self-defense law before that bill was already plenty adequate to protect Americans.
Stand Your Ground changed one fundamental, powerful idea in self-defense. It gives a person the right to use deadly force even if they have a means of escape or exit from the confrontation. The law says a person has no duty to retreat and has the right to stand his or her ground and meet force with force. The law allows a person to use deadly force even if the threat against them is not real. It can be a perceived threat. The bill was introduced in Florida in 2005 by a National Rifle Association lobbyist.
It was passed on the Florida State House floor. Marion Hammer, the NRA lobbyist, was staring down the lawmakers as they voted. She was hovering over Jeb Bush as he signed the bill into law. And then she took the bill to a closed-door ALEC meeting in Grapevine, Texas, where ALEC had its Criminal Justice Task Force meeting.
The Florida law passed in 2005 was brought to the American Legislative Exchange Council, and at that point it was discussed and adopted.
Was the NRA involved in this in any way, or do you know?
I believe that it's no secret that the National Rifle Association is interested in Second Amendment issues.
So you don't know if they were involved, or you do?
Well, they were members at the time. They were also members of the task force.
That meeting was co-chaired by Walmart, the largest seller of long guns in the world, the biggest retailer of ammunition in the world, and that bill was ratified unanimously as an ALEC model.
And from there, it was included within our registry of model policies. That's the extent of it.
Graves claims ALEC's role was much more than that ALEC directly advocated for its passage in numerous states. ALEC did track the bill in legislatures across the country. This legislative scorecard from ALEC from 2007 shows the Castle Doctrine Act, as it was known then, was one of ALEC's model bill highlights for the year.
It was introduced in nearly 34 states, became law in nearly 24 as a result of ALEC's efforts and the efforts of the NRA.
Do you think that ALEC's involvement with the model policy was instrumental in getting it to other states?
No, I don't think so.
No matter what level of involvement ALEC had in spreading Stand Your Ground legislation, the outcry over Trayvon Martin's shooting and Zimmerman's subsequent acquittal put the spotlight on the source of the model bill, and soon people began to question who ALEC was and how they operate.
Show me what democracy looks like! What democracy looks like!
Corporations shouldn't have a vote. American citizens and taxpayers are the ones who should have a vote. If you want to talk about policy that affects workers and the people who are actually part of this economy and make this economy run, give us a seat at the table.
protesters have started showing up at all ALEC conferences, seeking to raise awareness and put pressure on the group.
ALEC's been around since the 1970s, and people are just now finding out about it, but most people don't know enough. And the reason why is because they shut the doors and don't let us in. I think ALEC needs to open their doors. They need to be more public about what they're doing.
Thank all of you for staying involved in ALEC. I know this organization is under assault, like our freedoms, like our liberties, so I think it takes some real courage, and I truly appreciate you sticking with this organization. I think it's extremely important.
Just a word about our opponents. They are now more well-funded, more well-organized, and more committed to destroying ALEC and the things we stand for than ever before. We cannot let them succeed.
Last time I checked, it's still America. You know, we've got the right to assembly, we've got the right to free speech, we got the right to associate with whoever we'd like.
What do you think about the protesters outside?
It didn't cause problems. We don't particularly mind it. I would say that, as I've said previously, we support their right to express their perspectives, and we would appreciate and desire if they would respect our right to share our perspectives.
ALEC has responded to the criticism with action. They recently opened their website, allowing the world to see their model legislation, membership brochures, leadership, and some task force membership. They've also scrapped controversial model legislation like Stand Your Ground. But Graves says the damage has already been done.
Having some sunshine has been, very difficult for them, and it has led to more than 50 corporations leaving ALEC, saying that they're no longer going to be funding ALEC.
Some pieces of ALEC's agenda on voting rights or gun control issues were embarrassing or problematic for some of these mainstream corporations.
James Browning is the Regional Director of State Operations for Common Cause, a government watchdog group based in Washington, D.C. He says while the public is just starting to learn more about ALEC, they've had the group in their crosshairs for years.
We focused on it as, I think, one of the most dramatic examples that we have ever seen of corporate interests coming together and enjoying so much secret influence in our state capitals.
Browning says Common Cause is not concerned about ALEC's ideology. They believe ALEC is engaged in unreported lobbying. They believe ALEC is doing so much lobbying that they're in violation of their nonprofit status as a charity.
In April of 2012, we filed our first complaint asking the IRS to investigate ALEC's use of these charitable funds for political purposes.
Browning says if ALEC is violating their tax status, then all those donations to ALEC that corporations have been using as a tax write-off could be a problem.
Corporations are concerned about their own image and their own liability if the IRS or some of these state attorneys general investigate and come out and say, yes, in fact, this has been an inappropriate use of these funds. This is political.
Does ALEC do any lobbying at all?
None.
Zero.
Zero.
What ALEC has done is tell the IRS repeatedly that it spent zero, nothing on lobbying, not a penny. Not a penny on grassroots lobbying, not a penny on direct lobbying.
So do you believe that ALEC is lobbying?
Oh, I don't just believe it, I know it, and we can prove it time and time again. It's quite clear. They're absolutely lobbying.
Lobbying under Montana law is defined as the act of promoting or opposing legislation, and it includes any direct communication with legislators, such as face-to-face meetings. This is especially true when a lobbyist and a lawmaker are working together to draft legislation. Lobbying is perfectly legal, but it must be reported, so the public knows who's been putting their financial muscle behind a bill.
Just drafting the bill and educating them and giving them the materials to introduce it and run these campaigns, that in and of itself is captured by lobbying law.
If this was going on in the state of Montana, say a lawmaker sat down with a lobbyist for some group and they worked on a bill together under state law, this is lobbying. Why is that not considered lobbying when it takes place at ALEC?
The work that we do is focused on nonpartisan study, analysis, and research. We don't work on bills, we work on policies. Policies are ideas. The simple fact is, We don't lobby because we don't advance laws. We don't try to work on specific laws in specific states.
But an Internet Archive search of ALEC's own website reveals the lobbying firm Shook, Hardy & Bacon has represented ALEC and testified in favor of specific bills in state legislatures across the nation. In testimony before a Connecticut legislative committee, Shook, Hardy & Bacon lobbyist Kerry Silverman says his firm represents the American Legislative Exchange Council. Then he specifically advocates for passage of Connecticut Senate Bill 570 as a good government bill. Another Shook, Hardy & Bacon lobbyist, Mark Behrens, clearly tells an Ohio legislative committee, "I am testifying today on behalf of the American Legislative Exchange Council," and later says that Ohio Senate Bill 161 makes good public policy sense. "I urge you to enact it now." The archived ALEC pages reveal numerous other instances of ALEC representatives testifying in other states, including Georgia, Oklahoma, New Hampshire, and even testifying in Congress.
In some states, if you are invited to testify before a committee or on the floor, then you are invited to do so. And simply put, that's not lobbying when you've been invited to speak.
When you're requested.
When you're requested. Now, if you said, "Please let me come and speak," that's lobbying. That's the nuance, that's the difference, and that's what we don't do.
Nothing in either man's testimony or the committee minutes indicates they were invited. Mr. Barron's testimony in Ohio says only, "Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of Senate Bill 161. And more recent testimony by Mr. Behrens in 2009 in North Dakota says, "Thank you for allowing me to testify on behalf of the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, in support of House Bill 1430. Beyond direct testimony, critics say there's another way they believe ALEC has been secretly lobbying state legislators, by using something called an issue alert.
We've obtained issue alerts from open records requests in Arizona, Texas, Ohio, Wisconsin, and other states.
Meyerling says ALEC sends issue alerts simply to let lawmakers know the group's research on a topic when it comes up during a session. Documents with Common Cause reveal ALEC sent over 140 issue alerts to the states in 2011 alone, including 5 alerts that went to Montana lawmakers.
The issue alerts that we send are general in nature. They don't contain bill numbers. They only discuss ideas. And as long as what we're doing is discussing nonpartisan study, analysis, and research, which would be this is what is happening in tax, then that's not lobbying.
A lot of these communications are very specific. This bill needs to be introduced. This bill, please support this bill. We urge you to pass this bill. You know, that's direct lobbying.
Most of the nearly 150 issue alerts from 2011 show a specific bill number, and all 5 issue alerts to Montana legislators contain specific bill numbers and a push for their passage, saying the American Legislative Exchange Council strongly supports this legislation, which is based on its own model legislation.
I do have an issue alert here from Montana that went out, and it does name a particular bill.
I'm sure you have it. You don't need to show it to me. It's not something we do anymore.
And before, if that happened before, you'd say that might be lobbying, right?
I wouldn't say it's lobbying. I would say that the laws that govern ethics and lobbying in states around the country are changing on a constant basis, and we do our very best to adhere with the law as it changes.
If it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, looks like a duck, it's a duck. It's really unequivocal.
They are acting like lobbyists. They're acting, in fact, some ways even more powerful than lobbyists, because they're offering up services. Thousands of dollars they spend to get a piece of legislation drafted that's a huge expense.
We don't know what the legislators do. Once they leave here, it's up to them as individuals, as legislators who represent their constituents. We don't track bills, we don't track policy, we don't track where it goes.
However, it does appear ALEC has tracked its model bills extensively in the past. ALEC's own legislative scorecards from 2006, 2007, and 2010 detail the total number of ALEC models introduced in the prior session and how many were enacted. In 2006, ALEC reports 4 bills were introduced in Montana and 1 passed. In 2007, 12 were introduced and 2 were signed into law. And in 2010, the ALEC scorecard shows 11 bills introduced and 1 enacted. In ALEC's 2011-2012 public sector membership brochure, the organization touts its success in the states, saying, historically, during each legislative cycle, ALEC legislators introduce over 1,000 pieces of legislation based on these models, approximately 18% of which are enacted.
Do you think that we'd have Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, Ted Cruz from Texas? Do you think they would be here if ALEC was not important? Of course they wouldn't. They're here because we are important.
The notion that the agenda is being set years in advance, and that, you know, if there are companies out there setting an agenda, well, the public has a right to know.
One of the most important questions here is, what's the level of advocacy in these meetings, in these conferences? How explicit are they in these meetings about saying, use this as a bill, here are the co-sponsors we want, here's the whole plan for victory?
We really do need to start with model legislation, but that's coordinated. We're trying to pass the exact same laws at the exact same time, using the same language, the same talking points, the same arguments.
Tracing ALEC's involvement in the political process can be extremely difficult. Many times, lobbyists ask lawmakers to carry ALEC model legislation. Montana PBS positively identified at least 6 model bills during the last few sessions as ALEC matches, and none of the lawmakers who carried those bills were ALEC members. Furthermore, they had no idea they were ALEC models.
I didn't talk to ALEC, nor did I work with them, nor did I hear from anyone else that it was an ALEC bill.
Someone actually asked me to carry one that I think turned out to be ALEC stuff.
At the end of the day, could ALEC have some fingerprints on this bill? Sure, it could. I can't say for certain that it doesn't. But to my knowledge, they don't. When I asked the question, who's behind this, who wrote this bill, ALEC never came up.
Representative Austin Knutson is talking about his charter school bill from the 2013 session. During discussion over the bill, a lawmaker directly asked if it was an ALEC model bill.
I'd love to know the answer to that question.
Montana PBS decided to do some digging to find the answer. For years, ALEC has offered model legislation to establish charter schools across the nation. A charter school is a school that receives taxpayer money, but does not have to comply with most of the regulations a public school has to, such as hiring licensed teachers. Proponents say it would allow for innovative new schools. Critics say since charter schools are not subject to the same regulations, they're really private schools taking public money.
They want to unhinge government from the taxpayer. They would like to privatize the public programs and services that government employees, school teachers, provide. That's a market-based construct. ALEC sees all of that as positive, in part because it does drive public dollars, taxpayer dollars, into the private sector. And in almost all of those environments, you don't have unions, and you don't have government regulation.
Eric Fever has been the president of the Montana Teachers Union for almost 30 years, and he's an outspoken critic of charter schools and the so-called school choice movement.
These are the people's schools. The people's schools are not private. They are public. We own them, and we should never, ever surrender that.
It's not about the privatization of the public schools at all. It's about finding options. What Mr. Fever describes as the perfect system, and has for years, isn't in fact a perfect monopoly. And we've decided that monopolies don't serve the public best. And what this is it creates a bunch of options so that a child that's failing in a traditional public school has options and can stay in school and can finally graduate.
Jeff Laszloffy is the president of the Montana Family Foundation, a nonprofit group that brought the bill forward and lobbied lawmakers to pass it.
This is completely about the kids. We're looking at plugging kids into a system that works for them.
Since the Montana Family Foundation is a special nonprofit, they don't have to reveal their donors, which can include corporations or groups, and they can do unlimited lobbying. Records from the Commissioner of Political Practices office show the Montana Family Foundation spent over $50,000 lobbying the legislature last session.
We don't know its source of revenue. I would like to know who funds them.
Laszloffy says ALEC has never been a donor to the Montana Family Foundation. He also says they've had no involvement with ALEC on the school choice issue.
We don't want anybody talking about the Legislative Exchange Council and some kind of a nexus between charter schools in Montana, because there is none. We didn't use ALEC legislation, model legislation. We didn't go to ALEC for any kind of counsel. There was no connection, absolutely none.
A closer look at the bill Representative Knutson carried and the Family Foundation pushed during the 2013 session reveals it does have ALEC model language in it. It's a long bill, but there are clearly sections that are identical to ALEC's Charter School Growth with Quality Act.
It's virtually word for word.
Is there a possibility some language might have slipped in there unintentionally so?
I don't even know how to answer that. I mean, we didn't deal with ALEC. We don't have anything to do with ALEC.
However, in 2008, the Montana Family Foundation, along with ALEC and 8 other pro-school choice groups, including the Friedman Foundation, sponsored a survey of 1,200 Montanans. The results of the survey were trumpeted in an article in the Laurel Outlook in October of 2008, and the Family Foundation put the entire survey into the legislative record during testimony on charter schools in 2011. And then there was the 2013 school choice rally at the State House to kickstart support for the school choice bills during the legislature.
There might have been 100 people here. Half of them were kids from private religious schools around town. And it didn't last very long. It was a Montana Family Foundation thing.
There were people there from private schools, there were people there from public schools, there were people there that are just interested in school choice in general.
At first glance, it looks like a grassroots effort for school choice. However, research reveals dozens of rallies across the United States in the same time period, featuring the exact same scarves and signs, including Georgia, Minnesota, Virginia, Colorado, and Indiana.
There's an organization that we work with, the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, and they sponsor a National School Choice Week, and so we decided to hold a rally in Montana too.
And did they provide the signs and the scarves? You see all the school choice rallies all across the United States.
Yeah,
very
there were
similar.
like 3,000 rallies across the United States. Yes, they did. That's where we got them from.
The National School Choice Week website reveals that the Friedman Foundation is just one of many supporters. ALEC is named a supporter too. The website also offers helpful talking points and the do's and don'ts of selling the policies. You don't need to convince people there's a problem. You need to convince them choice is the solution. There was also a full-page ad for National School Choice Week in a 2011 edition of Inside ALEC magazine, an ALEC publication sent to lawmakers.
I think the sense, especially in citizen legislatures like ours, is that these bills are coming to them from, there's a groundswell of support for charter schools, and it's really not.
It's an excellent example that ALEC pushes in the states, and it has lots of allies that are linked with ALEC, either directly or indirectly.
I believe it's no secret that we're interested in school choice, that we care about the success of individual children, and as the children are the future of America, we want to make sure that they have whatever they need.
It's all about money. I don't want to be cynical to the extreme, but if money were not involved here, I don't think we would have folks clamoring for the privatization of public schools in Montana.
I can't imagine why there would be a reason for a charter school to be a for-profit school. To me, that would look like a private school. These schools get public funding because they're public schools.
And are there for-profit charter schools in other states?
I don't even know how to answer that, because I don't know why you would need a for-profit.
However, many charter schools across the nation are for profit. A 2012 report from the National Education Policy Center found nearly 80% of the charters in Michigan alone were for profit. Investment options have sprung up around charter schools, and banks and equity funds receive huge tax breaks for lending money to them.
What would be, if you could buy one thing right now, David, one type of asset in real estate, what would it be?
Well, probably the charter school business, we said, is our highest growth and most appealing segment right now of the portfolio. It's the most high in demand, it's the most recession resistant, and great opportunity set with 500 schools starting every year. It's a $2.5 billion opportunity set in rough measure annually.
Documents acquired by Common Cause show in 2011 the ALEC Education Task Force was stacked with foundations dedicated to pushing for charter schools and with corporations that make money off of them, including Kaplan Higher Education, the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, K-12, Insight Schools, the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, the Alliance for School Choice, Scantron, National Heritage Academies, and Connections Academy.
Is there a corporate vested interest in seeing some of this happen, along with benefiting the kids?
I believe all companies are in the interest of creating a public good and creating an advancement of their bottom line. That's free markets. That's what they do.
So there's definitely some money to be made in that area.
Yes.
People in this country understand the connection between companies, campaign finances, lobbyists, and legislation. They don't like it. 90% of the people in this country want more transparency. They want more accountability.
That's why Common Cause filed their complaint with the IRS, because they say ALEC is keeping people in the dark about where their bills come from and who is behind them. Browning believes the issue alerts, the lawmaker scholarships, and what goes on in the task forces should all be reported as lobbying.
Yes, there are other groups who disseminate these bills, but the thing that really makes ALEC stand out is the flouting for decades of these lobbying laws. The failure to report this lobbying, these activities by ALEC, puts it into its own universe where no other group can hope to compete. Every group does controversial things, but if you can keep a lot of that secret, then that's an unfair advantage.
If it turns out that they find that there has been lobbying over the years, what does that mean for ALEC?
It's my understanding that the IRS is interested in right future action and is interested in organizations taking corrective action.
Though IRS officials will not discuss or confirm any action on their part, it appears that internally, ALEC is concerned about a possible IRS investigation. During this December meeting, The Guardian released a trove of leaked ALEC board meeting documents. In those documents, ALEC attorney Alan Dye writes, "It is possible that at some point the Internal Revenue Service will audit ALEC. Though we do not believe that any activity carried on by ALEC is lobbying, the IRS could disagree."
Their own lawyers have advised them that they need to get on the right side of the disclosure issue, that if they keep claiming that this is not lobbying, and if they keep funding these activities with tax-deductible, these so-called charitable contributions, that they could get into serious trouble. And that's the impetus behind setting up the Jeffersonian Project.
The existence of the Jeffersonian Project was revealed in The Guardian's leaked documents. It's a new 501c4 nonprofit created by ALEC. Donations to a C4 are not tax deductible, but a C4 can engage in unlimited lobbying. According to the documents, ALEC plans to shift any activity that might be considered lobbying to the Jeffersonian Project instead. ALEC attorney Alan Dye laid out the benefits of the newly formed 501c4, saying, "It removes questions of ethical violations made by our critics and state ethics boards. All ALEC policy briefs can be sent out as issue alerts by the Jeffersonian Project, which can include legislative bill numbers and support or oppose positions. ALEC can again freely provide testimony on pending legislation."
C4s have been the instruments of dark money where enormous sums have been flowing through some of these groups to run ads in our elections, so-called issue ads, that have been very distorting.
The 501c4 is a proactive measure to help us comply with potential future laws. It gives us the opportunity to engage more fully with citizens.
What do you mean it gives you the opportunity to engage citizens more fully? What does that mean?
It means we can more fully communicate directly with citizens.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, the 501c4 can be what they're calling these dark money groups, right?
I wouldn't call it a dark money group. I would call it another IRS vehicle for citizen advocacy.
It could also, according to the documents, be an excellent new source of revenue for ALEC after they've lost dozens of large corporations as members and seen their enrollment among lawmakers drop significantly over recent controversies like Stand Your Ground.
ALEC has been attacked a couple of years, especially over the last year, by some left-wing activist groups.
My advice to ALEC is very, very simple. Stand your ground.
Every time I have a meeting, there's a calculated strategic article, followed by strategic protest, followed by echo chamber of progressive groups talking about a number of outlandish things.
When some of these ALEC members, ask, well, how do we respond to some of these criticisms? I think they have been told by ALEC, well, they just don't like our bills. They just don't like our position on guns. They don't like our voting ID bill. And I think, frankly, ALEC has failed to understand the seriousness of these transparency problems and has been more focused on what they see as a political fight with people who don't like them ideologically.
ALEC is on an ongoing crusade to become more transparent and to open things up. I believe transparency is a process and it's a continuum, and we're on that continuum.
For now, that continuum does not include the state chairs meeting, where new lawmakers learn the inner workings of ALEC, the task force meetings, where model legislation is drafted and debated, and the parties, where lawmakers and corporate lobbyists celebrate together. ALEC also refused Montana PBS's request for more interviews, and they declined to allow us to interview the chair of their private sector advisory board, powerful Mississippi lobbyist Steve Seal. And over the past year, they've stamped some of their communications with a copyright that claims the documents are not subject to public records laws, and that any lawmaker who receives a request for them should contact ALEC.
They can say they're open and transparent, doesn't make it so. Where the real business takes place, where these corporations and lawmakers are negotiating and discussing these bills, the public and press is excluded.
I'll continue to work on this, and the organization will continue to do it. Now, what I'll also say about critical organizations is that they need to acknowledge change. We have changed, and they refuse to acknowledge that we have changed.
I think that if ALEC were to, going forward, start acknowledging the bills that it's lobbying for, registering as a lobbyist, reporting that lobbying, that would be a step forward in compliance with the law. It wouldn't erase 40 years of failing to comply with the law or decades of failing to do so.
You can't undo the damage that's been done. And that's what's so outrageous about ALEC's influence over these decades. You can't go back and undo a lot of these things now. It's too late.